Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know, the CEO of Mt. Gox tried to concern troll his way into a bailout, just like Hank Paulson trolling Congress in 2008. Mark Karpelès told other Bitcoin firms that he was really also very concerned that if they didn't bail him out to the tune of 200,000 Bitcoin, then Bitcoin would collapse. Of course, when Treasury Secretary, ex-Goldman Sachs man Hank Paulson did the same, Congress and shrieking voters gave him what he wanted. For markets had tumbled by nearly 1,000 points. Wah! Yes, we're big babies. Stop it, they cried. So, Mark, now that you have bankrupted the Magic Gathering online exchange and allegedly disappeared with your customers' money in the style of Jon Corzine of MF Global infamy, and now that U.S. federal prosecutors have subpoenaed you, it's time to get a job on Wall Street. That's where too big to fail crybabies operate. Bitcoin has no place for babies. Stacy.
Yes, Max. Well, allegedly, all of this is allegedly. Mark Karpelès at Mt. Gox has lost or misplaced or stolen 744,000 Bitcoin. And again, we're pre-recording this a bit, so we don't know if he's jumped from some tall building in Tokyo yet. But at the time of the recording, he has not yet jumped. Now, that 744,000 Bitcoin is about 6% of all Bitcoin out there. But did you know that 3% of Chinese GDP per year is also stolen, taken out of the country, and brought to Australia, the UK, Canada, and America? Corrupt Chinese officials flee overseas, some bound for Australia. So apparently there's an intensifying crackdown on corruption in China, so they're all fleeing. And the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, a prestigious government-controlled think tank, urged stricter monitoring of what it termed naked officials, those whose spouses or children have migrated overseas and were therefore more likely potential recipients of illicit funds from within China. The phenomenon of the flight of officials is likely to escalate, particularly under the current anti-graft wave, said Liu Yanbin, a researcher at the Academy and co-author of the report. Corrupt cadres are running out of places to live in this country.
Right, so 3% of China's GDP is being extracted by these corrupt officials fleeing. What percentage of the U.S. GDP is tied to these too big to fails on Wall Street that are being bailed out and disrupting their economy? I think it's something like 22%. So a mere 6% of the Bitcoin economy being in question due to the machinations of Mark Karpelès over there in Tokyo. It's part and parcel of what you see in markets. The point being, though, that he's established himself as a totally corrupt guy. Therefore, he should be working on Wall Street, not in the Bitcoin space, because Bitcoin is free market capitalism. It's not crony capitalism. It's not too big to fail capitalism. He tried to emulate Hank Paulson by extorting a bailout fee from other Bitcoin firms. So he's clearly on the wrong side of the crypto divide. He should be in fiat world, not in crypto world.
Well, at one point, that 744,000 Bitcoins was worth close to $1 billion. Right now, it's worth like $400 million. But, you know, there's a place for, if you can steal and loot that much from any economy, there's a place for you. As they point out here for these Chinese officials, past experience shows that the most popular destinations for corrupt officials are the U.S., Canada, and Australia, said Hu Jingdao, an economics professor at the Beijing Institute of Technology. Australia has already become a major recipient country of Chinese corrupt officials. Now, Australia is changing their visa system because there were so many Chinese. There were literally tens of thousands of them on this list, on this visa application list for one of the top visa applications there, the visa categories. And instead, because there were so many, they reckon they could charge them like 2.5 million Australian dollars instead of the, I don't know, the tens of thousands they were charging previously.
Well, this is inflation. People say there's no inflation, but this is inflation. The central banks are printing lots of money, and it's going into Chinese visa applicants whose price for coming into the UK is going from 1 million to 2 million, soon to be 5 million pounds. Why do they want to come here? They want to come here to launder the money they're stealing from China. When they arrive here, they use all the laundered money given to them through the central banking system to jack up real estate prices in London, and everyone else who's actually working for a living, like firemen, policemen, school teachers, doctors, they have to move out of London to make room for the kleptocrats, and that's where the inflation is creating a problem in the economy.
Well, that's where you have housing bubbles, the countries they mention, Australia, Canada. Think of the Vancouver house prices. Again, a lot of those are also bought by Chinese. They could be fleeing. Now, they said, that it was the Boston Consulting Group who said that 3% of annual GDP every year is taken from the country, smuggled out by these corrupt officials, the naked officials. Now, the actual numbers are quite amazing. They say a previous report from the CAS said more than 18,000 officials had fled the country between 1995 and 2008, smuggling out assets totaling 800 billion yuan, which is $145 billion. In 1 week alone last year, the state-run Economic Observer newspaper reported that 714 government officials fled overseas and did not return.
Again, this is inflationary. The people who are being destroyed by this inflation are dying. And the government is pointing to the people dying on the street and saying, you see, that's deflation. So we need to keep interest rates low. They don't bother looking at the fact that on the top end, due to mass migration of billionaires, it's causing incredible inflation that's bankrupting and destroying everyone else who's not in the kleptocrat class. But the bankers only look at the people who are the victims of the kleptocracy and say, you see, there's deflation. Let's keep interest rates low. They've put the blinders on, and they don't look anywhere else in the economy where hyperinflation of visas going from 1 million pounds to 3 million pounds in 24 months, that doesn't seem to factor into their calculations. Why they should raise interest rates, not make visa applicants higher. Because all you're doing is you're feeding the kleptocracy and you're continuing to create economic victims.
Now, Mark Karpeles did issue a statement claiming he was still in Tokyo. So we don't know if he's actually fled to Australia, Canada, or the U.S. under one of these visa programs with all his looted Bitcoin. But the actual Chinese themselves, who are victims of these corrupt officials, well, Mt. Gox exchange shutdown sparks Chinese Bitcoin gold rush. Chinese investors rush to buy Bitcoin. Max, we were watching that on fiatleak.com, actually. You could just see voo, 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 all the Bitcoin going straight into China. Well, since Tuesday, more than 30,000 Bitcoins have changed hands in China. That's 4 times the usual trade volume and compares with just 300 exchanged in the United States.
Right, Mark Karpeles is the Jon Corzine of the Bitcoin world. He made a terrible bet on Bitcoin. Had he been able to hold his position, it would have been very profitable for him. But like Jon Corzine and his position in Eurobonds, the timing was bad. He ended up bankrupting MF Global. He did eventually get a stay of execution from Goldman Sachs and his friends in Washington because they can print all the fiat money they want to cover all the crimes that are being committed. But Bitcoin cannot be printed to cover up the crimes. So like real market, free market capitalism, this guy's going to have to actually face the music.
Well, exactly. Everybody's saying, well, there should be regulation. But now you compare it to Jon Corzine, just like Mark Karpeles, they actually made really excellent, wicked, cool bets. They made sure bets. But they both dipped into client funds. They both dipped into client funds to cover their losses. Now, Jon Corzine, despite all of the regulation, despite everything that happened post-Enron, where CEOs are supposed to know what's going on with their books, he pleaded ignorance. He said, I'm just stupid. I didn't know that this was going on, and he got out of jail free. Well, people are saying Mark Karpeles should have known. He apparently never audited his books once, they say, in the last 3 years. So he's alleging he's as stupid as Jon Corzine.
Well, in free market capitalist economies, you have something called the price signal. And under Jon Corzine, the price signal of the bond market was manipulated by his folks and friends in the various bankers around the world to make it look like there wasn't this massive fraud going on. In the case of free market capitalism of Bitcoin, the price signal of Bitcoin dropping 50% from a high tells us that there's in fact something going on that needs to be looked at. And now it's being looked at, and the dead wood is being cleaned out of the Bitcoin economy. You know, people who say that Bitcoin is not regulated that's false. The Bitcoin is the most regulated currency in the world. It's called the Bitcoin protocol. That's the regulation. It disintermediates, and it gets rid of the need for the CFO or the Serious Fraud Office or the SEC or anyone else, FinRens, FinCEN. You don't need them because it's self-regulating in the truest sense of the word. It's like the equation E equals MC squared. There's nothing you can do to perfect it. It is what it is. It was discovered, and that's what it is. You don't need a regulator to come in and say, we need to regulate E equals MC squared. Similarly, with the Bitcoin protocol, there's nothing any regulator can do to add or subtract from the fact of the protocol what it is. That's what it is.
So we were talking about China and the corruption there. There were 41 new billionaires created last year. They're only second to the United States, where there were 72 billion new billionaires created. So I want to talk about corruption in the United States, because everybody, the U.S. is the global police force, right? Well, political connections in turbulent times. In a seminal 2001 paper, Ray Fisman mapped out the connections of various Indonesian companies to then-President Suharto and showed that the market value of those companies varied relative to the value of otherwise similar companies as rumors spread about Suharto's health. So they're like, ha, that's a banana republic, they're corrupt. Well, they've just done a study looking at the United States, in particular, those bankers, in particularly connected very strongly to Tim Geithner. And what they found, over the 10 trading days following the announcement of Tim Geithner as Treasury Secretary, financial firms with a connection to Geithner experienced a cumulative abnormal return of about 12% relative to other financial sector firms. This reversed when his nomination ran into trouble due to unexpected tax issues. So the same corruption clearly is being priced in. The price signals as saying that it is a corrupt nation.
The U.S. is the easiest place for billionaires and dictators to launder money. Why? Because it's the only country in the world where you can have anonymous corporations. A lot of Americans create entities overseas, and then those entities create anonymous corporations in America so that they launder their money in America. General Electric, they made billions of dollars in revenues. They paid less than $20 million in taxes last year because of massive fraud, because America is the easiest place to commit massive fraud. And the same thing with pretty much the entire S&P 500. But anyway, we're out of time. We'll have to pick this up next time. Thanks so much.
Okay, Max.
Stay right there. Much more coming your way.
In 2010, one of the first things released by WikiLeaks was a secret video recording that actually looked like a video game, showing 2 American Apache helicopters opening fire on a dozen people in Iraq. This is what it means to live in a society where images of violence have become normalized. This is what desensitization and lack of empathy look like.
When we turn an experience into a spectacle, when we disassociate our own embodied actions from an activity, we also absent ourselves from certain kinds of moral investment.
I absolutely am frightened of the potential of games to desensitize people. We know they can because the military uses games and simulations to desensitize people.
The reality of war is not simply shooting, but it is killing, and killing that exacts a penalty of the killer. And people for whom war is defined by popular media don't get that.
The wheel caught on the roadside. The car skidded at breakneck speed and fell into a ditch, and I was thrown out of the car.
She was like a broken doll. There wasn't a single whole piece left.
I thought if I lived and had a chance to start my life from scratch, I would start making dolls to help children.
Right after he was born, the baby was all in casts. His legs are getting bigger, and the orthoses get too small, so we have to order new ones.
Svetlana has raised money for us.
She helps us to get leg braces.
5 years after my potentially fatal injuries in a car crash, I gave birth to my little Michelle. I think she's my reward for helping all those children. We're selling the dolls to buy life for the children.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Charles Hoskinson. He's a cryptographer and one of the guys behind a new crypto phenomenon, Ethereum. Charles, welcome to the Keiser Report.
It's a pleasure to be on.
Now, I said something in the first half. I want to get your comment on it, because a lot of people are talking about Bitcoin in terms of regulation. And I said, the thing about Bitcoin is it's, to a degree, self-regulated. The algorithm, the protocol, is the regulation. So my example was E equals MC squared. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, a regulator can come in and say, well, maybe that isn't what it means. They can have no effect on it. It is what it is. The Bitcoin protocol, it's self-regulating. It's the protocol. It doesn't matter what any regulator says. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yes and no. So it's a fair statement when you stay in crypto land. So as long as you're within the Bitcoin blockchain, the digital spectrum, that's fine. The minute you want to touch the fiat world, you want to touch the actual currency world, then that's actually where they have a say. So the points of regulation where we're seeing it strongly happening are at the exchanges.
Right. This has always been kind of the membrane to separate the two worlds, and this is where they're going to focus in. Conceivably, crypto could eventually have its own ecosystem where it never touches fiat, I would imagine, at some point.
Well, as long as you have to pay your taxes in fiat, there's always going to be a need for that money supply. But yeah, that's correct. More and more commerce can be done in the digital spectrum, and this is already being the case in places like Africa, for example, Kenya, where they transact with M-Pesa, they transact with other digital currencies, and so we'll probably see more proliferation where rule of law and currencies aren't quite stable.
Right, so it's almost like they're seceding from the fiat world. But I want to move on to Ethereum, because this is what we're here to talk about. So Ethereum, you know, we broke Bitcoin on this show. We were first to talk about it really in the world. We talked about Litecoin. We were the first to talk about Litecoin. Now I want to be the very first to talk about Ethereum, because this is really a huge new chapter in the whole crypto story. So give a little brief on it, if you can.
Yeah, sure. So Ethereum is really just a continuation of the experiment of cryptocurrencies. And so if we go back to the history of Bitcoin, there was two things that they were testing. They were testing a blockchain, so this idea of a decentralized database that everybody has a copy of. And the second thing was a transaction system with these tokens that you could send around. So effectively it became email for money, and that's great. But then people said, well, we want all these other features. We want prediction markets, we want gambling, we want Wall Street, we want companies to live on a blockchain, we want law, and there was this endless amount of features that people could invent. So what we did at Ethereum is it's really a project of frustration. We took a step back and said, no features, let's have a featureless Turing-complete blockchain, and let's go ahead and build kind of like the Android of the cryptocurrency space to sit on top of it, and let's make everything one-click installation. Your wallet, one click, open transactions, one click, Ripple, one click, just go down the list. So that, in a nutshell, is basically Ethereum. It's this featureless thing where you can build your own features, you can build your own applications, and it kind of unifies the entire cryptocurrency space into one bucket.
So you've got the blockchain, which is kind of the genius of Bitcoin.
Exactly.
And you've got, it's used as a payment system, which is very fantastic.
It's an amazing
as you
system.
point out, every single transaction carries with it every transaction that's ever happened up until that point.
Right.
So you've got complete transparency. So what Ethereum says is that this blockchain can be used in another way.
In a more abstracted way. It can be used basically for anything, and I don't, as the designer, want to figure that out. Rather, what I'm going to do is give that to you, and I want to give that to everybody else in the ecosystem and say, you now have this beautiful foundation to build whatever you want to build on top of it.
Okay, I mean, here's the Thames River behind us.
Sure.
It's flowing through the city of London. There are now, that could be the blockchain, in other words. You know, this is the base of the crypto Bitcoin universe. All along the Thames are different ways people are accessing the Thames. There's a wharf there, there's a boat, there are buildings, there's commerce being done. So Ethereum is kind of plugging into the flow that is Bitcoin, the phenomenon that is Bitcoin, and allowing folks to build all kinds of things that are the word that came up when talking about Ethereum is efficiency.
Right.
So, and one of the ideas is that I had this, we were talking earlier, all of the financial contracts in the world can be broken down into 60 contracts, if there's futures, options, brokerage.
Right.
So those 60 contracts, just talk a little bit about that, how that would work with Ethereum.
Oh, in terms of Willie Bromitz, he's done some great work. So if people go to projectactus.org, Willie's working with MIT, and actually it's 30 contracts. He took a look at everything, every financial relationship, and they're really like molecules in a sense. And you can actually break them down to more fundamental elements, these stated cash flows, basically. And so he looked at this and said, wow, this is really interesting. Can we actually try to replicate all of Wall Street from some base elements? And that's what Project Actus is doing. So what we're trying to do with Willie and trying to do with others is actually take those, import those, and actually run those on Ethereum. And the goal is to actually take Wall Street and put it on a blockchain. But this time it's transparent, it's fair, and it's not too big to fail.
So here you have Bitcoin is currency,
Right.
which is giving central bankers and bankers the jitters, making them quite nervous, rightfully so.
Right.
Here you have on Ethereum a way to take my correction, 30 essential contracts that
Right.
encompass the universe of financialization. And you're giving anyone, anywhere, the ability to simply plug into using Ethereum on the blockchain and potentially take companies public, create futures contracts,
Yes.
create prediction markets, all for virtually no cost.
Exactly.
So everyone in that industry, Wall Street, City of London, is now, to use a word often uttered in the tech space, disintermediated, right? So they get kind of blown out in a sense.
They're new tools, and it depends on the existing incumbents to decide how they want to use these tools. But the point is that the tools we have today work for 2 billion people, and they work somewhat well, but they don't work for the whole world. And so the goal is, how do we build a tool set that's going to work for 7 billion people? And how do we build a tool set that's going to work fair for 7 billion people? So the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it became the money of the internet. It's a fair money, no matter where you're at, it works the same. And the goal of Ethereum is kind of to become the internet of money. It's a whole bunch of different things, from contracts between people to contracts between properties, so we have smart property, to even organizations that could live on a blockchain. And you could build consensus engines, you can build reputation systems, you can do gambling, you could do whatever you want to do. Our job is to build the foundation. The world's job is to find what the applications are.
Okay, now one article suggests that Ethereum could replace or make obsolete Bitcoin.
No, we actually view Bitcoin to be kind of like gold and Ethereum to be more like oil in terms of the economics and how we've designed the system. So Bitcoin makes a really good store of value. If you put your money into it, no matter when you put it in, over the long term you've made a lot of money. And our hope is that's going to continue, especially because of the deflationary economic model. Ethereum is more like a gigantic computational engine where people build things on top and they use their computational engine to do things in a trustless way. And the fuel that runs that engine is Ether, the base unit of value in our ecosystem. So they have different use cases, and I think they actually can live in harmony. And that's actually why Roger Ver said in a recent video, hey, Bitcoin and Ethereum are great things to work together.
Okay, so they're complementary.
Exactly.
Okay, now you're a cryptographer. So before Bitcoin, there was something called cryptography.
Right.
And the Satoshi Nakamoto in the Bitcoin phenomenon is, cryptography, the way it works, it could be turned into a currency. Mm-hmm. Because the computing power necessary to solve computational problems for cryptography mm-hmm. Is setting up a situation where harnessing a network of folks together to do that. In other words, my question is, what was that light bulb moment, I think, and this would be interesting. There's cryptography, it existed before Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. What was Satoshi's insight? What was that light bulb moment? What exactly the transition from, cryptography to a currency model? If that's a legitimate question.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, how would you describe that?
There's really 2 cryptographic primitives that are used in Bitcoin. One is a primitive used for consensus. So there's this idea of the blockchain where I put things into the blockchain and they don't come out. And it's trusted and secure across all parties. So you need a hashing algorithm to do that. And we use SHA-256. Maxcoin uses SHA-3, which is better. So there's...
Maxcoin is better?
Well,
how so?
SHA-3 is great.
Because it's
a new cryptographic primitive. It uses a sponge construction. There's all this magic behind it. So I like SHA-3 more than SHA-256, but there's the debate.
There's no debate. Maxcoin is better.
Yeah.
No, but I think before we're jumping ahead, I want to get back into the insight of,
right.
Of the cryptography. It's used for secure online transactions.
So there's 2 things, right? So the first is to make sure that the database is secure. So the ledger itself is secured by a mining process, and that mining process relies on a hash algorithm. The second thing is, how do you spend your money? Who gives you the right to do that? So it's called public key cryptography. In the particular case of a Bitcoin, it uses ECDSA, elliptic curve digital signing algorithm. And there's 2 parts: a public address that everybody in the world can know, and that's fine, and then there's a private key that only the person who has the right to spend the money has. So these 2 things put together actually allow you to create a completely decentralized and trustless currency.
Okay, would it be correct to say that the problem Bitcoin solves is double spending?
Yes, it solves double spending.
Okay, because before then, I could send somebody an electronic token, but I could conceivably do that and send it out to 10 people at the same time.
Right, because
and that's the problem.
You needed a central authority to maintain the database, to inhibit double spending. But with the hashing algorithm, you actually have digital consensus in a decentralized way to prevent you from counterfeiting money.
So to verify
So it creates
the fact
digital scarcity, in a sense, which is the first time that's ever been done.
Talk a little bit more about that, a digital scarcity.
Yeah, so effectively, once you have a database that's secured by consensus, nobody in the ecosystem, nobody in the world can tamper with that unless they gain an overwhelming amount of hash power in the network. So effectively, when you have tokens that are in that database, those tokens are scarce. They can't be cloned or replicated. So just like gold, it has that property, and that's very unique. It's never been done before in a digital sense.
The tokens are the bitcoins.
Exactly.
Right, so you're paying the people who are lending their CPU, their computers, to hash, and in exchange, they're getting a token.
Yep.
Now those tokens, it just so happens, can be used now like money.
And that's why it was an experiment, because when it was first built, the tokens had no value. Then you could buy a pizza for 10,000 of them, and now a lot of people are millionaires as a result of the appreciation of value, because they're scarce.
Okay, right, and so scarcity, here's another description I would apply to a Bitcoin on the scarcity issue. In other words, you could say Bitcoin, the idea of a Bitcoin or the solutions to these cryptological problems have always existed since the beginning of time, but only in the last 5 years has there been enough computer power and the ability to network computers to actually go into the digital space and mine them. You could, like, for example, gold's been in the Earth's crust forever, but it took technology and capital to go mine the gold. The idea of turning a cryptological solution into a currency, it's kind of there since the beginning of time, you could say, because mathematics has been with us since the beginning of time.
Right.
But it was only in the last few years that you could harness together a network of computers, solve this problem, and get at this extremely scarce number, this precious number. And I call them precious numbers for this in this way, and a monetized precious number. Is that fair?
So,
or is that crazy? Or is that overly poetic?
You needed a lot of magic things to happen for Bitcoin to exist. You needed the guys in the 80s who were thinking about digital currencies to do their things. You needed Wei Dai to do this work with Crypto++. You needed Adam Back to go ahead and create Hashcash. And all of these things aggregated together at this beautiful paradigm-shifting focal point, which was Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper. And it was really the capstone. And we do this all the time in math. If you look at Andrew Wiles when he solved Fermat's last theorem, it wasn't just Andrew Wiles. There was hundreds of people cited, because you needed all those mathematicians that came before to build something, some tool to give him. So Bitcoin is really the capstone of that. And Ethereum is the next step, our hope is. We're looking at everything that's been done in the Bitcoin ecosystem. We've looked at all the innovations, all the failures, and said, okay, now that we know these things, let's try to build another step. And then somebody's going to build another step after us. And
so the intrinsic value story for Bitcoin and Ethereum all comes back to scarcity.
Yeah, it comes back to scarcity in a sense, and it also comes back to the social network around the money. Money
right,
is
but
all
scarcity is something that very few people are talked about in a way that seems to resonate out there, because people just assume that digits are infinite. But they're not in this case, because these are solutions and numbers that require vast arrays of computers to solve for, translating into scarcity. But anyway, we've got to go. And I told you we'd be running out of time quickly, and we'd be all crying about it. But in fact, we're out of time, so I must say goodbye. But thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you so much, Max.
All right, super. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Charles Hoskinson of the Ethereum Project. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.